thank you for joining us today as we shed light on a pressing global issue as part of our series for Education Interrupted. The series of Education Interrupted is part of the conceptualizing peace efforts of Guilford College with a collaborative network of institutions, educators, practitioners, and individuals dedicated to enhancing peace education opportunities. My name is Noor Ghazi, and I co-lead the Conceptualizing Peace efforts alongside with our college president, Dr. Kyle Farmbry. With my work, in particular, the Education Interrupted series, is really inspired by my background experience. I was born and raised in Baghdad, Iraq, during the economic sanctions at that time in the 90s. A time where thousands of children died due to the malnutrition. And attending school was another harsh reality for students who don't have access to school supplies, proper food, and even safe classroom. I personally was internally displaced many times due to the continuous conflict in Iraq, then left Iraq in 2006, seeking refuge in Syria with my family. However, I was privileged to finish my high school education in Syria before being relocated to the United States as refugee in 2008. I can say I am one of the top 1% lucky people who were able to find a safe haven to have access to education. So today we delve into an urgent and often underreported issue that affects millions of young lives across the globe, the interruption of education due to conflict. We'll explore these issues in depth. We'll be speaking with experts in the field, educators on the front lines, and most importantly, individuals whose educational journeys have been directly affected by conflict. I am honored to have this conversation today with Jason Terry, who's the Director of Strategic Programs at United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, in the United States, a nonprofit that lifts up the voices, experiences, and humanity of Palestine refugees to secure American support for resources essential to every human being. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Noor. It's an honor to be here, especially as a Guilford College alumna. Really happy to support the college in any way and to see this initiative taking shape. We had some wonderful conversations on campus back in April, and I'm glad to see that those are moving forward.
Thank you so much, Jason, again. I think we can start by taking a step back to reflect on this conflict that's been happening in Gaza as we're approaching the 1 year now in October. And we can talk about how the Palestinian people have long held this deep commitment to education. They reflected in their historically high literacy rate and the vital role that UNRWA had played in supporting schools across Gaza. So before the conflict that started back in October, as we know, education was a very important part of daily life in Gaza with families and communities that they were prioritizing learning as a path to empowerment and hope for the future. So I would like to start by asking the question, if you could give us a sense of the level of destruction that is today in Gaza and the numbers of people and students who are out of school today.
Thank you, Noor. What we're seeing in Gaza is really unprecedented in terms of destruction, not just locally, but globally in a lot of ways. UNRWA has existed since 1975 as a temporary solution to Palestine refugees who were displaced in between 1947 and 49. That temporary solution is now 75 years old. And it provides healthcare, education, rights protection services, sanitation, and infrastructure work, in some ways operating as a government would. until there's a political solution to the plight of Palestine refugees. At UNRWA USA, we have been supporting UNRWA since 2006, particularly in the areas of mental health, but also education, healthcare more generally, human rights protection, and emergency response, which has obviously been huge for us in the last year. In terms of the local, the sort of pre-war situation, bear in mind there are about 660,000 school-aged children who have been deprived of learning for a year. Prior to the war, UNRWA itself was the second largest education provider in the Gaza Strip. It had 288 schools operating in 183 buildings and serving about 300,000 students. Those students were served by 10,000 educators and an additional 800 counselors and assistant counselors. UNRWA USA has been supporting the school counseling program for the last dozen years through our Gaza 5Ks. We just had one in Dallas a little while ago. And so that has been a continued effort for us here in the US. Many of those schools operate on a double or triple shift basis because there are more students than there are classrooms. In addition, UNRWA operated 2 technical vocational education and training centers in Gaza City and Khan Yunis, the latter of which has been completely destroyed, and a rehabilitation center for the visually impaired, also completely destroyed, that also UNRWA USA and our partners had been supporting for a number of years. In addition to the UNRWA schools, there were about 300 government schools and over 60 private schools. And then looking at higher education, there are about 20 institutions of higher learning. Those included traditional universities, as well as nursing schools, technical colleges, and advanced training centers.
And Jason, I guess I would like to take a little bit of a step back to, we're talking about the level of destruction in Gaza, the loss of this generation, what they're facing when it comes to education. In general, what is the attitude of the Palestinian people towards education? Prior to the war, as you have said, this has been temporary for many, many years, but how does this attitude toward education in Palestine?
Yeah, I'm not Palestinian and I don't want to try to speak for them, but what I can say is that the literacy rate in Palestine for many, many years now has consistently been around 98%. That's one of the highest in the world. That's higher than the United States. Colleagues I've spoken to since joining UNRWA USA repeatedly point out that education is essential to expanding opportunities in the midst of a constant and ongoing occupation. So it's not just seen, I think, as just something you do or you send your kids every day, but something that's critical to human development.
And I think with this, I can't help but to ask, so we have an entire population of children who are out of school, but there are also efforts on the ground trying to provide those curriculum and education to children. So what are these percentage, Jason, and how successful organizations on the ground today that they're trying to alleviate some of those needs, and especially when it comes to education?
Yeah, since last October, UNRWA's counselors and assistant counselors have been circulating through the shelters, most of which are former schools or other available buildings, areas where there are lots of tents. They've been conducting mental health support to children. That takes the form of organized recreational time, individual and group counseling, and providing support for caregivers. Since last October, those counselors have reached about 470,000 children, usually seeing between 7,500 and 10,000 each week. And I just want to flag that one of the things those counselors are doing, and that has been up until about August, the only education happening on the ground in Gaza, those counselors have been conducting sessions on explosive ordnance risk reduction. So imagine being a small child and just for a whole year The only education you get is how to identify a bomb or a missile and how to avoid it. That's just tragic to me.
And I think that brings us to the point of, if we and our audience can get a little bit of sense of the specific challenges that children in Gaza face when it comes to showing up to classes.
Yeah, the biggest challenge is there aren't really classes anymore. About 95% of UNRWA schools are now being used as shelters. Many of those same buildings have been attacked, heavily damaged, or totally destroyed. That said, UNRWA launched on August 1st its Back to Learning initiative, focused on getting at least some informal learning going in shelter spaces. Again, this is carving a classroom out of what had been a school or setting up a tent somewhere. And the goal is to create a sense of normalcy and routine for those children. And also to really do some deep diving into the mental health challenges the children face, especially in their first month of the program, and then giving them some tools and equipment and materials for some self-learning, something their parents can help them with, things like that. But that's a tremendous, tremendous lift because the bombs are still falling.
Well, with all of these challenges, how does it impact the ability to focus and learn?
Yeah, my colleagues talk now of what they're calling constant traumatic stress disorder. Nothing post about it. You and I see videos of destruction, photos every day. But even with all the media we've got around us, nothing really gets you used to the sounds, the smells, the pains of hunger and disease and broken bodies. Um, Children, even adults, aren't really built for this. And so I can't imagine how difficult learning must be when you're carrying all these other things. The children we see videos from and interviewed, there seemed to be a real desire for a sense of normalcy, for a sense of mental stimulation, for a sense of safety, all the things that we would sort of categorize as a normal childhood. But when you're living in that constant state of trauma, I can't imagine the hurdles those children are going through just to show up for maybe an hour or two of learning a day. Prior to the war, about 800,000 children in Gaza were estimated in need of mental health care. That estimate has been revised to all of them, 100%, 1.2 million or so. They will likely need that for the rest of their lives. Our colleagues are talking about huge numbers of children facing depression, heightened anxiety, regressive behaviors, even suicidal ideation. Some of the drawings that we've seen children do are about avoiding bombs, bombs falling from trees, bombs falling from the sky, buildings falling down. These are children who are trying to process a situation that's incredibly hard to process at any age. And then compounding that, at least 17,000 children, some have estimated as much as 50,000, are unaccompanied and separated from their families. They might be truly orphaned. They might just have gotten disconnected as a bomb fell or as a family was displaced. Your average family in Gaza has now been displaced 10 times in the last year. So those challenges for those children in particular, where they're living with families that they may not know as well, or they're living in some sort of group shelter situation, those challenges are compounded even more.
These are big numbers we're talking about. As we talk about these stories, I can't help but reflect on my own journey where attending school became one of the most dangerous things that you could do in Iraq, and especially during 2006, where we would attend a school, hopping over dead bodies just to make it to school. Fire would erupt in front of our school. Many children would be killed in front of the school with the stray bullets. Um, Talking about the sense of normalcy in this situation, I think for us, we started to normalize these scenes of violence every day. But Jason, let me ask you this: are there any efforts today that are led by organizations on the ground to alleviate some of those challenges that children are facing today in Gaza? Not only in providing school and education and trying to bring sense of normalcy in this hard time, but are there any other efforts beside trying to provide education at this time?
Yeah, the humanitarian response is really across the board. Um, in addition to the return to learning that began in August, um, where there was an initial goal of reaching 8,500 students, scaling up to 28,000, and eventually getting all the children in Gaza into some sort of informal learning situation. Um, Beyond that, UNRWA is the largest humanitarian actor in the Gaza Strip, and it helps coordinate the work of the many other aid agencies on the ground, be they NGOs, other UN agencies, or grassroots organizations locally. UNRWA directly provides about 60% of the aid in Gaza right now, including education, healthcare, food and water, sanitation services, and providing fuel to the water systems and health facilities, and also receiving and transporting the supplies that come through the crossings. Um, Looking beyond Gaza, UNRWA works in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, that has seen an alarming increase in military and settler violence, making it the most violent year in the last 20. As well as Lebanon, where the situation is getting worse every day. UNRWA is working in Syria, which is still reeling from an earthquake and 10 years of civil war, and in Jordan, where there are the most Palestine refugees and have been for 75 years, and which has also become a massive logistics hub for humanitarian response. The Pivoting back to education a bit, there's been since January a three-phased ramp up plan, starting with back to learning, which is just informal self-guiding as the first part, looking ahead, carving out sufficient temporary spaces for more formalized instruction, and then finally a sort of return to standard curriculum at grade levels. Understand we're not even going to get to phase 2 until there's a ceasefire. You just can't do it. So this is a huge effort. A lot of organizations are involved. I want to applaud my colleagues in particular. They're about to launch the second round of a polio vaccine campaign. One, they should have never had to do that. But I will say they vaccinated about 500,000 children in a week and a half during carefully negotiated, couple hours long humanitarian pauses, as they were called. That's an incredible feat, and they're about to launch the second round of that. That is a huge, huge, huge undertaking in the midst of the chaos and conflict of this war. Most of UNRWA's employees are Palestinian themselves, and they are just as displaced and suffering just as much as the people they're helping in a lot of cases. So not only is the effort huge, but these are folks who've been working constantly for a year to help their own community.
And I think that brings me to the next question. In your experience, are there long-term impact that these specific children might face as a result of conflict? You have touched on some of them. I can't help but to think about the challenges that the children right now facing who are amputees or like the PTSD or like with the lost learning, all of this package of challenges that the children are facing. How does the long-term impact look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's really hard to predict at this point, but it's not going to be good. There are more child amputees in Gaza now than anywhere else in the world. I think something like 10 or more children a day are losing limbs, um, often enduring incredibly painful surgeries because of their lack of supplies. Um, Not only has a year of learning been lost, but everything has been destroyed at some level. About 90% of educational facilities have been damaged or destroyed heavily. Um, all the universities are gone. Um, but also 90% of everything else has been destroyed. So, housing, healthcare systems, um, basic infrastructure and utilities. When you look at satellite um, snapshots of Gaza from last September 2023 and then periodically throughout this war, you can see a flattening of the landscape and the built environment. Um, I've seen some estimates. One back in January said it was going to take 15 years to clear out all the rubble and rebuild. That was 10 months ago. So I can't imagine what that estimate is now. Um, but that's all to say that seeing a child learning in a building built for that purpose that is permanent is 5, 10 years down the road, probably.
Mm. Now, we're talking about this entire generation of Gaza. As I was following the news recently, that some of those students who were displaced and they left Gaza and they were relocated in Lebanon. I've seen some of the students also who are reporting that now, due to the escalation in Lebanon, again, they're losing this opportunity to education. Um, how would the work change in Gaza and Lebanon as well at this point if a ceasefire happened?
Yeah, in some ways, a lot of it will continue um, because of the level of destruction. In Gaza, there's gonna be a need for temporary shelter, for food assistance from around the world for many years to come, for health assistance, for just a tremendous sort of import, if allowed, of healthcare equipment, building materials, um, the heavy equipment needed to do the rubble clearing. Um, Understand part of the reason that clearing rubble is going to take so long is that there's there are bodies and unexploded bombs in much of these piles of rubble. So you can't just take a bulldozer to it. You have to sort of carefully go through it. Um, so if there were a ceasefire in Gaza, part of it will depend on humanitarian access. Access, that's part of the deal. You've probably seen that many of the restrictions on what can enter Gaza right now are entirely arbitrary.
Mm.
And if one item on a truck is rejected by an inspector, the entire truck goes to the back of the line. That line is in some cases 3 months long. Um, so humanitarian access and easing of restrictions on goods going through has to be part of a ceasefire deal. Um, Looking at Lebanon, the sad reality is that my colleagues have had time to prepare. Um, I think many of us knew that some sort of escalation was likely, and so they have been preparing for several months. So they've been able to pre-stage food, water, medical supplies, that kind of thing. Um, and they've designated where the shelters are going to be. Um, and that's a growing number. Many of them are already schools. I was in Lebanon in early 2023 and visited in particular um, an UNRWA school in Beirut where they were just finishing their English spelling bee that day, the first grade class. I got to meet the Queen of English in the first grade. She was an adorable, adorable little child. And she even had a crown. That was great. Um, and then later that day, we went to a place called Sableen Training Center near Tyre. And, the Palestine refugee camps in Lebanon are cramped and crowded and loud and um, not always very structurally safe. And Sableen is this sort of idyllic hillside overlooking the sea. The buildings are spaced out. They're dorms. We saw the students studying electronics and car mechanics and coding and social media marketing, all pretty young, 18, 20 years old.
Mm.
Sableen was one of the first shelters set up in Lebanon in the last week or so, and already has about 400 people there. So again, schools are sort of logical shelter spaces, but also when they become shelters, that has a ripple effect on education.
So just a quick follow-up question. Is there like a plan in place if there is a lasting peace? How would UNRWA help educate these children?
Yeah, I think we need to distinguish a little bit. If there's a ceasefire, I imagine UNRWA goes back to what it was doing in a phased way of trying to get back to its normal operations, which were, again, running a school system, running a healthcare system, running an infrastructure and sanitation team, that kind of thing. If there's a lasting peace, or there's an agreement between an Israeli government and some sort of Palestinian entity, um, that I don't know, because UNRWA, again, was supposed to be temporary. And part of the reason UNRWA is designed in the way it was so that an eventual Palestinian government could sort of take over the services that UNRWA has been providing.
So you walked us a little bit, Jason, and talked about the challenges that the challenges that are faced on the ground today, from restrictions on the borders to limitations, to resources. Can you just like recap again about the organizational challenges that UNRWA face? I imagine the logistics alone would be daunting. So can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a few things. One, in Gaza in particular, UNRWA is taking on roles in terms of humanitarian coordination, transportation, logistics, arranging security that it didn't necessarily have prior to the war. So
Hmm.
its workload has expanded.
Hmm.
The needs have gotten greater, and that means the financial needs have gotten greater. Um, UNRWA has been in a somewhat unstable financial position for the last several years. That has been made worse by attacks on its credibility by the Israeli government, which led to the withdrawal of funding by the United States government and 15 other countries. All those other countries are back except the United States,
Hmm.
but the United States was the largest donor. So that's an instant sort of $250 million hole in the budget right there at a time when you don't need it. Relief operations in Gaza this year alone are estimated at about 1.2 billion.
Mm.
Um, those attacks on credibility are not just financial, they're political, they're legal. The Israeli government is in some ways threatening UNRWA's ability to even work in Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. And then there's ripple effects here, particularly in the United States, where attacks on credibility, often not based on any particular amount of evidence, lead to sort of a poisoning of the UNRWA brand in the US Congress, um, which has led to the US government suspending funding to UNRWA through March 2025.
Mhm.
And then it'll be reviewed. Who knows what happens next? Um, and then here at UNRWA USA, we're looking at our own complex legal and political environment, where there are Lawsuits have been filed. There's proposed legislation in Congress that would allow the Treasury Secretary to unilaterally withdraw nonprofit status um, to any organization he or she deems supports terrorism. Funding terrorism is already illegal in the United States. US nonprofits don't do it. And if they do, they get shut down. So this is just extraneous circumventing the rule of law to really target organizations that serve the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian people. And I can imagine that initial target would expand to other justice-oriented organizations, causes. So it really is a chilling environment to work in when we need sustainability, we need clarity, we need support. Um, Instead, we have all these hurdles.
Talking about support, what role do other international organizations other than UNRWA play in supporting the education system in Gaza? And in your opinion, are there any successful partnerships that have helped improve the situation?
Yeah, I mean, within the UN system, UNICEF has been critical in terms of learning materials, in terms of helping with vaccine campaigns. Even before the polio vaccines were happening, there were vaccines about chickenpox and skin diseases and all the things that come when people are sort of massed together in ways they weren't before. The World Food Program is providing nutritional support to all the children going through UNRWA's Back to Learning program. There's a number of international and grassroots NGOs that are taking up the cause of getting children back to learning, um, getting qualified teachers in place. That's easy to do because all the teachers have been unemployed. Um, and so it really has been a growing movement in the last couple of months beyond UNRWA, but including UNRWA to get children back into school in some way. And then the support system broadly has been beautiful. Um,
Mhm.
a lot of countries have stepped up donations from their governments in ways they haven't, but also grassroots support has been huge. Here in the US at UNRWA USA, our supporter numbers grew tenfold in the last year.
Mhm.
Um, we have been able to mobilize over $50 million in aid to Gaza just through
Mhm.
ordinary US citizens. That's something we were never able to do before. We see recording artists donating royalties to their songs to us. We see groups getting together and hosting fundraisers, large and small, for UNRWA USA. Um, that can be a dinner party, it can be a group of school kids. Um, so, really, there has been this beautiful outpouring of grassroots support um, in the midst of all the challenges. And so, when you wake up in the morning and you see a kind note from a donor or a partner sort of encouraging you along, it helps keep you going.
Mm. Talking about the amazing support and the role of community members and the grassroots movements, are these efforts enough today to cover the needs on the ground?
Um, I mean, that's hard to answer.
Mm.
I think they're getting there, but thing that does worry me is that when when there is a ceasefire, when the bombs do stop falling,
Mm.
will this huge wave of support flatten off?
Mm.
Um, Again, with levels of destruction we're seeing, you can estimate reconstruction in Gaza alone costing 50 billion or more.
Mm.
Um, and so you're going to need solid 10, 15 years of consistent support from international actors, from governments, from grassroots donors. And so that's our next challenge, really, is to keep that support sustained and keep it going. I think we can keep at a pretty healthy level, but will it be enough? I don't know yet.
Talking about the support, and I want to stay within that topic, I can't help but to think about the role of counselors and teachers, um, whose mainly their job is to teach. But are there any other responsibilities that they're taking on? Can you just talk to us in general about the roles of counselors and teachers in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, again, the counselors have been working almost nonstop for about a year, um, and their support is critical,
Hmm.
absolutely critical, um, because bringing a smile to a child's face when they are spending their days collecting water, finding food, looking for wood to burn so that somebody can cook a meal. Um,
Mhm.
those are real grown-up challenges being faced by 6, 7, 8, 10 year olds. So the counselors are critical. So far, UNRWA has called back about 900 teachers for back to learning. Before they resume their service, they get a few days of training in responding to complex mental health situations. They're taught what to look for in terms of statements or activities or things a student might draw on a piece of paper. Um, and they're taught how they can get help for that child if needed. Um, so the teachers really are taking on now extra responsibility in terms of being eyes and ears on the mental health state of the children. Also should flag too that, children in Gaza have been traumatized.
Hmm.
Like trauma on Gaza's children didn't start in October 2023. There had been 6 military assaults in the 20 years before that. Um, whole generations have already grown up traumatized. This is just worse because it's constant, constant.
In this case, what resources or support systems do children in Gaza need most in order to continue their education amidst the ongoing conflict? What is that very first step towards many more steps to come to rebuild the entire society again?
The thing children and really everyone needs most is a ceasefire. Um, I cannot express how much a ceasefire is critical to child health and well-being. Um, that is the baseline for really doing anything long term to support, to educate, to provide um, resources. Um, that ceasefire needs to be immediate. Frankly, it should have happened several months ago.
Talking about ceasefire, in your experience, how do children in Gaza express their aspirations for the future despite the harsh realities they face today?
Yeah, I get access to a lot of media from the field, and one of the things I love is children being interviewed, and
Mm.
they're still talking about their desire for a future where they thrive. Um, they're still talking about wanting to be a teacher or wanting to be a nurse or wanting to be an engineer,
Mm.
wanting to raise a family, wanting to build a home.
Mm.
Um, their aspirations are real and they are, I think, universally relatable. And they still are there in spite of how genuinely attacked these children are. They're still trying. They're still trying to get through. They're still dreaming of a future that is peaceful for them, that is prosperous for them. I don't know how they have the strength.
And I think during these type of situations, children cannot but dream about what they want to be and become when they grow up. I think this becomes the only light they see amidst the chaotic moments that they live and seeing parents being displaced, don't know what's going to happen next. I still even remember when my parents, they stopped thinking about tomorrow. They said, we don't know if we're going to survive tonight. But for me, education, what kept me going. Jason, what can people watching this episode today do to help out?
Yeah, we've talked about the financial needs. People can go to UNRWA.org and make a tax deductible donation of any size. It's all welcome. Whether it's $5 or $500,000, we will take it and we'll make good use of it. On our website, you'll also find tools for setting up your own grassroots fundraising effort. Maybe you want to do an event. Maybe you want to get some friends or colleagues or peers or classmates together. We've got a toolkit you can use for that. Just in the last week or so, we've had a series of events around the country, including a Gaza 5K in Dallas, and the journalist Motaz Azeza, who we've all heard of, has been traveling with our team across the United States, speaking at events, raising awareness, generating funds. And then finally, it is important, it is essential to keep the pressure on Congress and elected officials in demanding a ceasefire and demanding the restoration of underfunding. You can do both those things on our website, UNRWA.org.
Thank you, Jason, for joining us today and providing such an invaluable insight into the dire situation in Gaza today. Your expertise has truly highlighted the devastating impact of the ongoing conflict on education for over 500,000 people in the region, and also with the recent escalations now affecting Lebanon. It is more than urgent than ever to bring attention to this critical issue. We will continue to explore these pressing concerns in our upcoming episodes as well, featuring more experts and voices from those directly impacted. It is imperative that we keep this conversation going. Once again, I am Noor Ghazi, and this is Education Interrupted. We appreciate your time and dedication to this cause and see you in the next episode. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thanks, Noor. Thanks for having me.